When you think about the US government, with its president, Congress, and Supreme Court, it just feels like it's always been there, right? But it wasn't a given. It was designed. And that leads to a really fascinating question.
I mean, who were the architects behind it? Did the founding fathers just dream it all up in a single room? Well, not exactly. Okay, let's dive into this, because the answer is pretty incredible. Turns out they weren't starting from scratch. They had a blueprint. And we all know this final structure, right? This is the classic setup we learned about in school. You've got Congress making the laws, the president carrying them out, and the Supreme Court making sense of them. So this is the finished building. But to really get it, we've got to look at the original plans. And that is the absolute key to the whole story. The Founding Fathers were brilliant, for sure, but they were also amazing students. They were soaking up ideas from this huge, revolutionary intellectual movement that was just taking over Europe. And that movement was called the Enlightenment. This was a time when thinkers started doing something kind of radical. They started applying logic and reason, the tools of science, to everything, especially to the question of how we should govern ourselves. So think about it. Instead of just saying, well, the king has a divine right to rule, end of story, these Enlightenment thinkers started asking, but wait, why? Does that make sense? They used reason to try and figure out the best, the most logical, the most just way to set up a government, and that led them to some seriously powerful ideas. First up, you've got this idea of natural law. This is the bedrock concept. It's the belief that some things are just universally right and wrong. Not because a government or a holy book tells you so, but because it's woven into the fabric of nature itself. It's a moral code we can figure out just by using our brains. And right on the heels of natural law comes this, natural rights. Now this was a game changer. The idea that you were born with certain rights that are yours simply because you exist. A government can't give them to you, and it can't take them away. Its only legitimate job is to protect them. This completely flips the old model of power on its head. Okay, so if the government's job is to protect our rights, what's our relationship to it? Well, that's where the social contract comes in. It's basically an agreement. We, the people, say, okay, government, will give you some power to keep things orderly. And in return, the government's side of the deal is, you got it, we'll protect your rights. It's a two-way street. So let's meet our first main architect. This is an English philosopher named John Locke. You can think of his work as a kind of formula for liberty. And believe me, America's founders had his books dog-eared and highlighted all over the place. In his most famous work, Locke defined the core natural rights as life, liberty, and property. He argued these were the absolute basics, the things that no government on earth could justifiably take from you. Now burn that phrase into your memory. Life, liberty, and property. Sound familiar? Yeah. Thomas Jefferson, writing the Declaration of Independence decades later, comes up with this absolute banger of a line. The echo is just, it's impossible to miss. I mean, there it is, side by side. The influence is crystal clear. But look at that one little change Jefferson made. He swapped out Locke's property for the much bigger, much more inspiring idea of the pursuit of happiness. That wasn't just a word swap, it was a massive upgrade to the whole American promise. It says it's not just about what you own, it's about what you can become. And Locke's influence didn't even stop there. His whole idea of a social contract, that's the DNA for one of America's most fundamental principles, that governments get their power from the consent of the governed. Power flows up from the people, not down from a king. That's pure Locke. So Locke gave us the philosophical why. The big ideas about liberty and rights, but what about the how? How do you actually build a government that does all that? For the answer to that, the founders looked to a brilliant French thinker, Baron de Montesquieu. He was the architect of structure, the guy who drew the power map. Montesquieu's observation was simple but profound. Power is dangerous. If you put too much power in one place, whether it's one person or one group, it's gonna lead to tyranny. It's just human nature. So what's the solution? Simple. Don't put it all in one place. You have to divide it. And this right here is his famous blueprint, the separation of powers. He said you have to split the government into 3 distinct branches, and each one gets its own specific job. This isn't just some abstract theory. This is literally the structure laid out in the US Constitution. It's Montesquieu's big idea brought to life. Okay, now it is super important that we get this next part right, because it's a really common mix-up.
As unbelievably important as Locke and Montesquieu were, they were not in Philadelphia signing the Declaration. They were not American founders.
And this timeline just makes it so clear. Look at those dates. Locke died way back in 1704. Montesquieu was gone by 1755. That's more than 20 years before the Declaration of Independence was even written. So you see, they weren't the parents of the revolution. They were more like its intellectual grandparents. They provided the powerful ideas that the next generation would run with.
So why are we talking about all this? Why does this history actually matter today? Because these aren't just old ideas in some dusty old books. They are the living, breathing architecture of American democracy, and their influence is all over the world.
It really boils down to this. When you read the soaring words of the Declaration of Independence, you are hearing John Locke. When you look at the checks and balances between the White House, Congress, and the Supreme Court, you're seeing Montesquieu's design in action. These European blueprints are baked directly into America's political DNA.
The ideas from Locke and Montesquieu were totally radical for their day, and they literally built a new kind of nation. So it really makes you wonder, right? What are the big influential ideas being debated today that might just become the common sense blueprints for the governments of the future? Definitely something to think about. Thanks so much for watching.